All right, good morning. My name is Dr. Justin Carter. I'm the professor of this voting and elections class. Um, First of all, this class is pretty difficult. The book is pretty difficult. Stick with it, read deeply, be sure to try and pull out the facts. I'll be lecturing each of the chapters, and this class is going to move pretty fast because it's an 8-week course. Another point I need to make is that we will be using the Rutledge Handbook of Voting and Elections. We will not be using the other book, so if you bought it, go give it back, go sell it back. I don't know where that book came from or why it's attached to my class. So, all right, chapter 1. We're going to be talking about voting and elections. The book opens up talking about 4 aspects of democracy that the book will focus on throughout the 27 chapters that we're going to read. The first is accountability. Accountability asks whether elected officials can be held accountable for doing a good or a bad job, right? The second is responsible government. This is the idea that the government can be held responsible. The government is basically appointed by the legislature or by elections. Its efficiency or its ability to govern can be regulated by the people, and then politicians can be kicked out if they do a bad job. Political parties are a main source of political mobilization. They mobilize the electorate. They are one of the main mobilizers in a political system. They inform the electorate. They mobilize the electorate. They contact the electorate. So political parties are very important. And they also sort of tie into accountability. If a party is not doing well, then it will be punished according to the voters. And then finally, we have system performance. And this is just the idea that the system has to perform to the satisfaction of the citizens, or again, they will be held accountable. Okay, we should talk about majoritarian versus proportional representation systems. Majoritarian systems are generally called first past the post systems. This means whoever wins the plurality of vote wins the district, right? There's only one elected official from every district, and whoever wins the most votes gets elected. A lot of systems aren't like that, especially in Europe and South America. They have proportional representation systems. This means that a district will have multiple multiple representatives come out of a single district. So say a political party gets 35% of the vote in their district, they will get 35% of the seats. So it's very different from the single member district majoritarian systems. It's a lot more, it involves a lot more political parties because there's a lot more likelihood that even smaller parties will get a seat. So there generally tends to be a whole lot more political parties. The political parties span a much wider ideological spectrum, whereas in majoritarian systems, generally the parties are looking for the median voter. They want to find that centrist voter so that they can get 50% plus one vote. Proportional representation party systems will have far left and far right parties, and then they'll have some parties vying for the center, but there tend to be a whole lot more political parties that are viable and valid. Okay. The benefits of a majoritarian system are that the electors generally have a mandate, right? They have to win 50% or more of the vote, and so they have a mandate from the electoral system and the voters. It's also a lot easier to hold politicians accountable in a majoritarian system Due to Duverger's law, there generally tend to only be two parties in a majoritarian system. So this is America, Britain, and some others. There tend to only be two parties, and so it's a lot easier to tell the party in power if they're doing poorly. Voters can just vote them out, right? It's really easy to sort of hold one party more accountable than another. In proportional representation systems, however, there's really not a mandate. There's so many parties in the system that nobody generally gets 50%, and so there's no general mandate from the voters. Responsibility for the voters gets blurred because there are so many parties, and because the political parties generally have to form what is called a coalition, because they don't have 50% of the legislature. And so they have to form a coalition with multiple political parties. This sort of waters down the ability of voters to be able to hold them accountable for poor governance. However, some of the benefits of proportional representation systems are, first, that they're more efficient. They tend to pass legislation at much higher rates than majoritarian systems, which tend to be sort of bogged down with checks and balances. These proportional representation systems tend to get better marks from voters. Voters tend to like PR systems much better than they like majoritarian systems. The vast majority of research shows that about 15 to 20% more voters like their system when they're in PR than they do the majoritarian system. And there's more political parties, so you get a lot more choice. So if you're a centrist, you have a choice. But then if you're on either extreme, if you're, say, a really extreme leftist or a really extreme rightist, you'll also get some sort of representation, whereas you tend not to have that in a majoritarian system. The book also talks about political competency, and says that political competency or political information for voters is vital to holding political parties and politicians accountable. Unfortunately, political competency is extremely low across the world. There's very little political information amongst regular voters. They tend not to know very much about politics. They tend not to even know sort of what three branches are in politics. They tend to have a hard time discerning differences between politicians and their party platforms. So voter information and voter knowledge is very low across the world. And this includes the United States. They also mention the internet. They talk about the internet and the advent of the internet and how this is affecting politics. It tends to allow people, especially young people, to have more say in politics and to be able to sort of involve themselves in discussions online and things of that sort. And finally, globalization is also sort of a problem when we're thinking about representation and holding politicians accountable. Globalization can sort of tie the hands of politicians. There are massive global events that occur that many politicians in a single state cannot sort of work their way around or change. So think of like the global financial collapse of 2007, 2008. Very few individual states had any real power over what happened to their country during that time. The United States probably had a little more just because of our financial sway. But think of a country like the Netherlands or Spain. They had very little chance of affecting the global economic downturn. Globalization also causes problems with accountability, right? If your own politicians can't really affect the policies or the economic trends, then it's hard to hold them accountable for those things. And finally, supranational institutions also tend to blur accountability. These are things like the European Union, the United Nations. They have some sort of international power that individual states don't necessarily have. So that's it for chapter 1. Stick around and I'll get more up. And thanks for watching and have a great day.